Is it possible to abuse someone if that person can't feel a thing? That's the question posed by the story Tuesday by Cheryl Ziden. In this story, an android robot is subject to pretty violent physical harm by her so-called owner, but it's complicated further by the fact that the android doesn't really seem to have emotional responses to this harm. So on one hand, you might argue that this is not abuse because in order to experience abuse, something must have a subjectivity, a consciousness. They must be able to feel pain and be aware that they are feeling this pain. In the case of an unfeeling android robot, you might ask the question of how different it is to hit said robot than to punch a punching bag, since the two have pretty similar emotional responses. Or that is, they seem to. The philosopher Thomas Nagel would probably argue that in this scenario, it's much safer to simply not assume. Since we as humans have absolutely no way of accessing the subjective character of an experience that is not our own, he would probably also argue that it's a little bit arbitrary to draw lines around where experience begins and ends. For example, what is to say that a blade of grass doesn't have experience, whereas a bat does? We simply have no way of drawing that distinction if we can't access either experience ourselves. All of this is simply a human assumption that the further down the phylogenetic tree we get, from bats down to ants, down to bacterial organisms, we simply assume that they have less consciousness. We don't know that for a fact. And so perhaps this goes for non-biological organisms like androids too. Basically, you could argue, who are we to draw the line around this android's so-called experiences and emotions when we simply have no way of validating them? Finally, there's also the consideration of what the word abuse actually means. Abuse, by definition, doesn't require a conscious recipient. It's possible to abuse and misuse objects. For example, I could abuse a camera by not putting the lens cap on, not storing it in a bag, and chucking it around so that the lens starts to crack. Perhaps the question we should be asking is not whether the abuse affects the android, but whether it affects the person who is perpetrating it. We might ask the psychological question: if a person is comfortable doling out abuse to an object that has very human characteristics, what does that say about them? So, is it possible to abuse an unfeeling android?